Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I'm your host, Hena Zuberi, and welcome back to another episode of Justice for All. Now, on today's segment, we'll be discussing refugee labor in Burma, Western intervention in the light of humanitarian crises, women's right related relief work, and Twitter activism. Joining us today are two special guests, Jamila Hanan and Professor Ashley Kennedy. I'm also going to invite my co host, Adem Carroll. Jamila is an activist and a humanitarian coordinator for the Hands for Rohingya Aid Project and Testimony Taylor's Rohingya Sewing Cooperative. Thank you, Jamila, for joining us today. Um,
Assalamu alaikum.
I'm also going to introduce our other panelist, Ashley Kennedy. Ashley Kennedy is an associate professor of philosophy in the Honors College of Florida Atlantic University. Her research centers on issues in philosophy of medicine, bioethics, and global justice. Professor Kennedy is currently writing a book on the diagnoses for medical residents, has written a recent article on child labor in Burma, and is co-producing a documentary on the same issue. So welcome both of you. We're going to also, as you know, this is our weekly Burma Task Force segment. We are going to do an update on Rohingya news. So if we could have our lovely brother Adem Carroll come up, and so we could have him start off with the news updates.
Yes, Assalamualaikum and Ramadan Mubarak to everyone. News items. Numerous media reported yesterday that COVID-19 has arrived in the crowded refugee camps of Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, a country with already dramatically increasing levels of contagion. Already 80% of NGO workers have been removed from direct services to the refugees. Human rights groups called for the restrictions on communication in the camps to be immediately lifted for the safety of all concerned. The news came only a day after fire spread in Rohingya camps again, the biggest fire up to now, destroying 330 small buildings and damaging another 300. The Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees is assisting camp residents. Hena?
The story I want to share is the mutiny story. This was inspiring, and it was like a pirate's tale. There was a boat carrying more than 400 Rohingya refugees that landed in Bangladesh in the early hours of April 16th. And it had experienced a dramatic mutiny 30 hours before it landed. And the story is so interesting, Adam, because of the fact that 4 of the 11 Rakhine traffickers were killed. 5 of them were rescued by another boat, and 2 traffickers, including the captain, were kept hostage to steer the trawler back to Bangladesh. What had happened is that a group of 17 Rohingya men confronted and overcame the human traffickers. They'd been asking them to dock at any port or any place that would accept them, but the traffickers kept delaying it, and the food was running out. So this was a very dramatic story, and one of hope as well, that people, even in the direst of circumstances, when they band together, they were able to bring 400 Rohingya refugees to safety.
Trafficking can be relevant to the whole question that we're discussing today about labor, about exploitation, and about empowerment. But first, one more news item. Rohingya Today reported this Monday that 5 Rohingyas were injured by military shelling but denied access to health care. Due to the movement restrictions imposed since 2012, Muslims from Pike Bay village can't visit the Kyaukto General Hospital only 15 minutes away. Instead, the critically injured were sent to a hospital 2 hours away by boat, but they were not allowed to be admitted. In his second story, Radio Free Asia reported that on Wednesday this week, a mine blast in Rakhine State killed 2 Rohingya children and injured another child as they picked mangoes in a deserted village on Wednesday, with the government, military, and rebel Arakan army blaming each other for the explosions, according to locals. So now we're ready for the main part of the show. Sister Hena?
Yes, so we would like to welcome back our guests, Jamila and Ashley. So what we wanted to primarily focus on in this specific program is the fact that refugee labor can be empowering and it can be disempowering. This is a group of people that are extremely vulnerable, and if things are done right, the use of refugee labor can be something that can give them a new lease in life. And for this specifically, we wanted to have Jamila share about her work and the work that has been done under testimonial tailors. We go back on this with the Burma Task Force as well, because these same group of women are the women that have been a part of our campaign of education, have been in, it was the original women that were photographed by Shafiq Rahman. And they are, so we've used that exhibition throughout the United States. They're on all our pamphlets. And Jamila, you can tell us more about what has happened with them after they were featured in that photographic project.
Yeah, well, I mean, it really is credit to Shafiq Rahman doing the initial reporting and getting to know these women. And through his introduction, I was able to assist them, and a number of us bought them sewing machines. I think Burma Task Force bought some as well. And just started with a few women, but it grew to, I think there was about 26 women. And we had the idea that maybe they might like to start a sewing cooperative, which we explained what that would entail, and they embraced the idea. And that's what they've done. And we wondered who they would sell their clothes to, because obviously nobody in the camps has much money. So I created a website for them, testimonytailors.com, and people can go on the website and they can buy their clothes that these women have made. And those clothes are given as a gift to other refugees. And then the donor receives a photo of their gift delivered. So it's been really rewarding project to be involved with, and we've seen that cooperative grow. Now there's over 80 women in the sewing cooperative. Yeah, so that's it in a nutshell. How
did you get involved with this? I mean, we've seen you, and this is where this Twitter activism comes into. And you have been such a beautiful example of not just being an armchair activist and not just tweeting and just leaving it at, Twitter storms. Can you tell us how you got involved with the fighting against this genocide and bringing this project to fruition?
Well, my journey into activism starts years back, probably over 10 years. And it was really it all leads into what I'm doing now. And it was a bit of a crisis moment in my life when I was suffering from anxiety and wondering, just how many awful things are going on in the world. And it was during this time of reflection, I realized that the reason why awful things happen is because people who have ability, who have skills, who have freedom of speech, who have good health, who have the means to do something, they don't do anything. And when I realized that, I just had to start living my life differently. And it started locally for me with an environmental campaign. And then it became an online campaign when I got involved with campaigning for some medics in Bahrain. So that's what I was doing online. And then I had a friend who was traveling in the area in Myanmar who contacted me and said, have you heard what's going on? You just need to see if you can help these people. And this was in 2012. I had no idea about their story.
Mm.
But when I saw what was happening, I just felt compelled to try and do something to raise awareness and try and stop what was, even back then in 2012, was clearly a genocide unfolding.
Exactly.
So I used my Twitter platform, and I had a lot of followers by that time, to just amplify their voices. And that's what I did for years. But, you know, more recently, it's become a more organised effort and more focused on aid now that there's all the refugees in Bangladesh.
Exactly. I mean, we've been through this journey for so long together. I remember when there was a show, there was a cooking show that was a French cooking show that was going to be taking place in right near one of these concentration camps during the early days of the genocide. And so Twitter has its power. It does for education, for awareness, and to spur companies to withdraw. For Telenor and some of these big campaigns that went on. But please do share how it on the ground work. Have you been to the camps yourself?
No, I haven't. Much to my dissatisfaction, and I was actually planning to go later this year, but of course with the COVID outbreak that will have to be postponed. So I think I'm really testament to how much can be done even though you're not physically there. And the way I've worked is through building up contacts and working with people who are on the ground, and through those, through getting to know people. Using my platform, I can help with public relations, I can help with website building, that's my skill. And I can help coordinate things with the public and with the wider world. So that's I guess really how I use Twitter. It's to bring people together and it's to help coordinate action. And it is possible to do that even though you're not physically on the ground. You do need people who are on the ground, but over time I've got those contacts. So yeah, it's taken years to get to the point where I can do really productive activism and help coordinate big aid efforts and raise large amounts of funds. But it all just started with, it did all start with tweets, and then thinking, what more can I do and how can I grow this? Yeah.
Adem, did you have questions for?
I don't.
Okay.
But it sounds great. Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to tell you about a little bit about what Testimony Tailors are doing at the moment.
Please.
So I've just launched today, actually. Excuse me if my throat goes dry. It's nearly time for iftar, and obviously I've not drunk all day, and so I can't take a drink of water. But we've just launched an appeal for people to buy Eid dresses to give as gifts to other refugees. So they've got 50 dresses in stock. We've got 1 week to sell them.
Oh, wow.
And anybody that goes onto their website, testimonytailors.com, can buy a dress that will be given as a gift to a Rohingya girl or Rohingya woman, and they will receive in their email a photo of their gift delivered, just for them. So it's a really beautiful thing to participate in. It's a way for your money to reach them directly. You can see who you've helped. It brings a lot of joy to the recipients on both sides, the donor and the people who are giving the gift. And it's really empowering for these women to see people from all around the world buying their clothes. It's true, you can't buy them for yourself. You're giving them as a gift, but they are beautiful dresses.
So tell us more about, I love how it's done. So it's a cooperative and they work together to buy the material. So tell us more about that.
Yeah. So what happens when you buy the dress is all of the money, all of it goes to their effort. So, I do this voluntarily and the people I work with do the work voluntarily. And what happens to that money is the woman who's made that garment is paid for her work well above market rates. And then the remainder of the money goes to the cooperative for the whole cooperative, which is run by the women themselves. So the women themselves have meetings and they decide what they're going to do, what they need to spend money on. So the cooperative buys the materials and then we distribute the materials to the women, so they don't have to buy the materials. It also assists with repairing sewing machines, and it's also now helping women, acting as a kind of interest-free bank for them as well. So some of them have taken money from the cooperative, say to buy a new mobile phone or a new solar panel, and then they can pay the cooperative back, you know, as they earn money, as a small percentage of the money that they earn. So yeah, that's how it's growing. They're keen to develop further their education, and we really hope to help them do that. But obviously, current situation with the lockdown, everything's a little bit on hold at the moment. But at least, you know, they work from home. They've got somewhere where they go for meetings, but they work from their homes, so they are able to, you know, still do some work even though they're confined in their homes at the moment.
Beautiful. And let's talk a little bit about these women. Many of them are rape survivors. They were the victims of the Tulatol massacre. Original one. So new people have joined in?
They have, yeah. It started with really the women who've suffered the absolute worst atrocities, and those were the women that, you know, really inspired me, because I was kind of witnessing from afar when they arrived in the camps and told their terrible testimonies, and then to see them less than a year later, to see photos of them smiling, you know, just how could women ever smile after what they've been through? Not to say that their trauma had gone, but just their incredible resilience and hope to continue with their lives was very inspiring. So it's the Tulatoli survivors, the survivors of the Tulatoli massacre, who we initially worked with, and a lot of these women had survived gang rape. Many of them had family members. Most of them had family members killed. Some of them had children killed. Some of them had seen their children killed in front of them. It's just incredibly tragic.
I love going to your website and seeing, because we're so used to seeing the photos that Shafiq first took, that are so blatantly like but even then they had this wonderful way of defiance. You know, their expressions were so defiant. Like, we don't need to cover our faces. We are here. This happened to us, but we're still surviving. And to take that spirit forward and actually put that to work, it's just that resilience is just it's so inspiring, and it keeps us wanting to continue to do the work over here.
Yeah, it really is. And it was actually seeing those images of, you know, there's no need to hide our faces, that encouraged me to reach out to Shafiq Rahman and just congratulate him on that work and find out more about the women. They are incredible. And I encourage anybody to go and, you know, read a bit more about them. On the Testimony Tailors website, there's their story and the short documentary from those early days on the About page. And then there's some profiles of a few of the women also on the website. But it has grown, like you say. Now, we were able to find more of the Testimony Tailors community that we know about, who lived elsewhere in the camp, and bring those into the sewing cooperative. But also their neighbours, you know, and also just any women that are brought to the community who have suffered terribly. So, you know, they might have lost children, they might be very young women who've lost their parents, women that are really struggling. So these are the ones that are kind of priority to join the cooperative. And people have been able to go onto the website and buy sewing machines, which are also given to the women. And that's how the cooperative has grown. We've just postponed that for the moment, because with the lockdown, that's not really possible at the moment. But, you know, hopefully. You know,
I wanted to show people, this is the project. And this is actually used on our, most of our material on the anti-rape work that we do. And these are some of the women. And then you can go and see on Testimony Taylor's page, these same women now are in colorful, beautiful dresses, and they're smiling, and it's just that difference between their time here and what they have made out of their tragedy, that the life that they've made, even in the harshest of circumstances, is what is so, especially her. I'm sure you'll recognize her. So this is fascinating. Now, tell me a little bit more about. I know you do beyond the Testimony Taylors project. You do other work as well, and I really want you to comment on how this sort of labor can be empowering, how it has changed their lives, and the fact that just that stigma of rape, it gave them, they made a place for themselves to be strong for each other. That mental health component as well.
Well, the rape was so widespread that perhaps it's destigmatized it a little bit, because most of the women, well, many of the women have been raped, and that's just what they've had to live through. They're survivors of genocide, so there's no shame in it, and they're just incredibly brave and courageous to come out and say, it's not us who needs to be hiding our faces. It's the criminals, it's not them. But it's still important to recognize that, we see them now smiling and how well they've done, but it's still really, really, really difficult for them. And regarding Testimony Taylors, it requires our continued support. It requires people to go back and do repeat orders, not just by that one time. So at the start, when they set up, of course, there was a surge. Everybody was like, oh, yeah, this is great. Everyone bought dresses. And now we have to really push and say, look, can you please go back and buy some more? They need our continued support. And there's some fantastic people who go every month and they buy a dress. Yeah. That's really what it needs. It needs continued support for them to be able to grow. And as the cooperative grows, they need more orders. And we're not really doing anything near enough to change their lives like we should be doing. Still scratching the surface, and they're still living with unbelievable trauma, and almost all of them have not had any professional help to overcome their psychological trauma. And really it's been the cooperative themselves that have helped the women who've helped each other. So the cooperative has given them the chance to come out of their homes and meet each other and come together and talk, just talk and be there for each other and do some work together. And that's really what's helped them heal themselves in some way.
I'd love to bring Professor Ashley on and Adem on and discuss this. Professor, this is this is part of your work, that you look at labor practices and how they disempower versus empowering. When you hear Jamila talk about her project, what comes to your mind?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me on the show today. And my work has been on child labor, the problem of child labor in Myanmar. And, we'll talk about this more later, I'm sure. There will need to be multiple solutions to this problem. And one of them, and this overlaps with Jamila's work, is giving women the opportunity to work. So during my trips to Myanmar, I've interviewed many parents and children, and more than one mother has said to me, I wish that I could get a job so that I didn't have to send my 8-year-old to work. And so, if mothers and fathers are able to work, it's far less likely that the children will be sent out to work as well. Now, the solution isn't that simple, but certainly part of the solution is allowing women to be able to work and to help support their families.
Yeah,
I just wanted to. Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry to overlap. I just wanted to jump onto that question as well and ask about women's opportunities in the camps. Like, besides your project, are there any other projects, and how is the situation of women in the camps specifically?
Well, I mean, it's incredibly difficult. Actually, none of the refugees are supposed to be working. They're expected to live at the moment on rations. And quite, well, some of them did have work with aid agencies. But recently there's been a move to basically sack all the Rohingya employees and replace them with Bangladeshi workers at the request of the Bangladeshi government. So it's become even more limiting. The aid agencies at least were trying to give women opportunities. And so it's kind of a double whammy for them by the aid agencies not being able to employ the Rohingya refugees anymore, because they were the ones who were really promoting women's rights as well. And it's so important for them on many different angles. One example, one of our women, I think, you know, this is probably the case for more than one, but we know specifically of one young woman who really had a lot of pressure on her to marry, and she didn't want to marry. Not at that time, not to that person. And she was able to say to her parents, if I get married, who's going to look after you? Because I'm the breadwinner of this family. And because she was the breadwinner and she was, you know, earning some money, they had to respect her wishes. It gave her power. And this is, you know, it's literally empowering when a woman has some money that they've earned. They have a say in what happens in the family. And, you know, that goes not just for refugee women, but women all over the world, you know, who are fighting against various forms of oppression and trying to fight for their rights. And it benefits the whole society for women to be enabled and for their talents to be contributed to the economy and to society. Everybody benefits. So it is a win-win situation. And with this project, there's one thing somebody just said with your project, Jamila, it's not my project. I mean, this is their project, and I really want to emphasize that. And what I'm doing is helping facilitate that, being a voice, helping. I mean, they've got their own voices, but helping them have a platform, helping them with technical skills. They decide what they're going to make. It's their designs. They decide when they're going to work. You know, they have demands and they let us know how they want things doing. So I just think that's a really valuable thing. And there needs to be more of these types of projects where the refugees themselves and the women themselves are actually leading the projects, developing themselves rather than just being given work.
Yeah, that's the most important part of that. This model is that it's run by refugees. The decisions are in their hands. They're not being manipulated. They're not being asked to do things that they do not want to do, or are doing it because they have no other choice. They're actually making use of their skills and providing to others around them. So it's building, the ecosystem is building. One question that a lot of people have asked, Jamila, is how can we get money into the camp, especially since a lot of the aid workers are not working anymore. And like we've had here, even Imana, the American Muslim Medical Association, who had a lot of, they were sponsoring a lot of workers. So how do you get money into the camps these days?
Well, we do it through trusted contacts, and obviously I can't go into the details of who those contacts people they are, but it's really through being embedded in the community, by having people in the camps and outside of the camps that we know and trust that we can get money in. And we're not dealing with massive amounts of money like the big Asia agencies are, but it's enough to help make a difference. And I don't know if I'm allowed to plug this, but there is we're running an appeal at the moment on handsforrohingya.org. If anyone clicks on the donate button, you can give £10. Well, £10 will help a family feed themselves for a month. And so we're doing cash distributions at the moment through the month of Ramadan and throughout the period of lockdown, where it's roughly the equivalent of, it's in dollars for you, it's probably about $12. That helps a family for an entire month buy extra vegetables, fruit and vegetables. So if anybody wants to go on and donate there, those cash distributions are currently ongoing. We've helped over 200 families during this month, and they get the whole lot. We pass on all the money. So if anybody does want to get a little bit of cash in, and it's going straight into the hands of a family, and we're prioritizing those families who are the most in need. Mm-hmm. And then of course the other way is to go onto testimonytailors.com and buy a dress for E to be given as a gift. Like I say, there were 50 10 minutes ago. Hopefully a few of them have already been sold.
Okay, hopefully. I'm definitely going to be purchasing some.
Excellent.
Okay,
thank you very
much. You took your time out during Ramadan, and I know it's time for you to go open your fast. So Ramadan Mubarak from us, and hopefully we will have you back on some other show to talk. There's lots to talk about.
Thanks, Jamila, very much. It's great work. We're going to do a transition now to the second part of the show, and with Professor Ashley Kennedy, but we're going to lead with a video about her work and give you a picture of some of the concerns and research that she's engaged with. So if we could play the video, that would be great. Well, it looks like we had it this time without sound. Too bad. Maybe we can play it later with the sound. But it's just a series of images of child labor, basically, child labor in Burma.
Of an Orpington pullet.
So there it goes. So as far as child labor goes, the International Labor Organization, the ILO, states that there are 152 million child laborers worldwide, and that nearly half of them are aged 5 to 11 years. Mm-hmm. Burma recently ratified the ILO Convention number 182 in December 2013, expressing political commitment to eliminate the worst forms of child labor. However, child labor is extremely widespread in Burma. And a society that does not manage to sustain a certain level of well-being for its children cannot be a just one. So today we will be discussing the cultural and economic reasons that child labor is still so accepted, and review the arguments that rationalize the current situation. So Ashley, thanks for coming on the show. And you've been working as a researcher and a documentarian, and you have a very interesting background in philosophy. Maybe just to begin, though, can you tell the story of how you came to this work, including the story about going to drink tea in that shop in Yangon?
Yeah, sure. So about 5 years ago, in 2015, I was teaching a summer school in China, and I made a brief stopover in Myanmar, just a visit. And one morning I had jet lag, so I walked across the street from where I was staying to a tea shop, and it was very early in the morning before the sun was even up, and I ordered tea and soup, and I was served by a boy who looked to be about 7 or 8 years old, and my younger son was 7 at the time, so I think I could probably judge his age. And I was later talking to a local friend, and I said, oh, this morning I had tea, and the shop owner's son served me. And she looked at me and said, no, if a child was serving you, it was definitely not the shop owner's son, because anyone who owns a shop has enough money to send their children to school. And that boy that you saw works 12 hours a day and sleeps under the plastic tables on the wooden floor at night. He comes from the countryside. His family is probably at least an 8-hour bus ride away. Mm-hmm. She didn't know that boy. She was just saying, this is the story of all the children in the tea shops. And I was shocked not to learn that there is child labor in the world, because of course I already knew that. The reason I was shocked is that it was so out in the open. It wasn't hidden. This is not a secret factory. You know, that these do exist, of course, in many countries around the world. Hidden child labor is also a problem. But what really struck me was that everybody knew. And there are children working in tea shops, children working at roadside stands, children, like in this picture, working in agriculture. So you see it in the city, you see it in the countryside as well. When I returned home, I wasn't able to forget about that brief experience. And so I thought, well, what do I do when I want to learn more about a problem? I read all the literature that's available. And so I started looking up, just Googling child labor in Myanmar. I even put a research assistant on this child labor in Myanmar. And there was nothing. And so then I was even more surprised. So I thought, why is there nothing written on this problem of child labor in Myanmar? And there's a complicated answer to that question. Part of the answer is that, of course, as you know, the country was closed for over 50 years. And that's part of the answer. But I think the other part of the answer is that it's just very much accepted in the society. And so then I thought, well, no one is working on this. Could this be true? It turns out there are some people that are working on it, but they're very difficult to find, and there was nothing published that I could find. But I eventually was able to partner with the International Labor Organization, as well as some smaller NGOs, local NGOs. And I've been, in the last 5 years, a total of 4 trips to the country. In December 2017, I traveled not the entire country, but quite a bit of it, in rural and urban areas, and with the help of a translator and a guide, was able to interview children and parents in their homes about their experiences with work, with school, with life. And while I was there, so this was, I guess, sort of the middle of not my first trip and not my most recent trip. I had an experience. I was sitting on the floor of a very rickety hut, looking down to the pigs below, hoping that I wasn't fall. Yes, there is. This is the sister of the boy that I'm going to tell you about, talking through a translator to some children. And there was a boy who was a bit older. He was 16, he told me. And his parents had made great sacrifices so that he could go to school and not actually work. But he was not able to pass the end of school exam, which is required in the country. But no one is ever able to pass that exam unless they pay for after school tutoring. It's a very long and difficult exam. And no one who is that poor would ever be able to pay an after school tutor. So he had, just a few days before I met him, had failed this end of school exam. And so he looked me in the eyes and through the translator said, now I have to do hard work in a factory for the rest of my life. This is the same job I would have had to take if I had had to drop out of school 5 years earlier. But now my parents have sacrificed for 5 years, and that's it. And I walked out that hut and I completely broke down in tears. I thought, this is an impossible situation. It's impossible. We can't fix it. And I spent, a few days taking a break from interviews, and I thought, what am I doing? What is the point? And then I thought, wait a minute, there's no such thing as an impossible situation. There's never an impossible situation. There are many situations that look to be impossible. But what do? You put one foot in front of the other. You start, and then you hopefully build a community who wants to come alongside you. You join in where others are working. And that's when I had the idea of, well, I'm a professor, I write papers. Most people don't read academic papers. But maybe if we can show these images to the larger international community in some sort of documentary form, we might be able to get other people on board, other people interested in joining in to help solve this problem. So that's not all of the detail, but that's some of the detail about how I came to work on this problem, and now I'm working together with a filmmaker. I am not a filmmaker, but named John Wakeford Francis. He is in LA, and he has a lot of experience making documentaries. So we are working together to put together a documentary. It's going to require at least one more, maybe 2 more trips in country with a small film crew. And the images that you saw, a local photographer took those, and so we do have some interviews, we have some still images, but in order to put together a full documentary that really shows some of the reasons for and hopefully points to some of the solutions to this problem, we'll need to go back into the country and bring a small film crew with us.
Actually, I was wondering, you mentioned about the exam, and I was wondering about the role of education as part of the problem here. The literacy rate in Burma is high,
Yes.
But according to UNESCO, the average adult in Burma has received only 2.8 years of schooling, and only 36.5% of eligible students enroll in secondary education, and 50 to 75% of children drop out of school before the 5th grade. That's huge. And you also mentioned, and I think in your report, that you wonder whether this exam that you referred to exists solely as a tool for strategic oppression. So I was wondering what you mean.
Yeah. So that's right. The dropout rates are abysmal, and far more than half of children have dropped out of school before age 11, like you said, grade 5, which is about age 11. And so not the majority, definitely a minority even sits for the final exam, which would happen around age 16 or 17. But this exam, I'd never heard the exam until I went for the second visit. And then everybody kept talking about the exam. If you don't pass the exam, then you can't get jobs X, Y, and Z. It's not like in the United States where, if you finish high school, there are many jobs that are open to you. And there are even some jobs that are open to you if you don't finish high school. But in Myanmar, the situation is different. This exam is a barrier to many jobs. For example, store clerk. You can't be a store clerk unless you have this exam. So I don't think it's written into the law, but in practice, this is absolutely done. They'll say, show me that you passed this exam, or you can't apply for this job. And I started to look into the exam, and it's in Burmese, so I can't read it, except with the help of the translator. But it's very long and requires memorizing very long passages, obscure passages from random text. I thought, is this an accident? Maybe, maybe not. Now, in recent years, there has been a push to reform the exam, and some changes are being made. So perhaps this will change in the future. I certainly hope so. But I don't know if there is. So I definitely think this exam is unjust in many ways, and it might be a strategic injustice. It might be some sort of structural injustice where there's no one person or one group or even the government behind it. It's absolutely an injustice, and I think that it needs to be changed or perhaps done away with altogether. There is a perception in Myanmar, and not just in Myanmar, other developing countries as well, that many of the people that are poor and uneducated have this idea that maybe whoever they are, the authorities or those in government, don't actually want us to get an education because we might rise up against the structure that's in place.
You talked a little bit about earlier. You said that you want to focus on solutions. So have you found some solutions?
So I think the solutions will need to be multiple. One that I mentioned earlier that overlaps with the work Jamila is doing is allowing opportunities for parents to have jobs that pay enough so their children don't have to go to work. But educational reform is another one. And part of educational reform is making school work more meaningful, but also removing these unjust barriers, like the matriculation exam. So those are two. And those are probably not the two that will be needed, but absolutely those are two that will be needed. And I also think public awareness campaigns, sometimes we say to ourselves, I think, maybe those things don't really work. But, child labor was once a problem in this country, in the United States. And I started looking into how that changed. I didn't know the history of that, but there was a photographer named Lewis Hines who snuck into factories in the early 1900s and pretended to be an inspector, but instead took black and white pictures that were later published in newspapers. And people became very upset when they saw these pictures and began to lobby their congressmen, congresswomen, and change happened because people saw pictures. And so I thought that was very inspirational and motivating to me.
You had mentioned just to finish with the educational aspect, that teachers are paid so little, and
yes.
They also are forbidden by law to do any side teaching. That paid tutoring is actually illegal.
Right.
So it's really hard to understand that. But so there's a lot of structural and bureaucratic hurdles to prevent education. And so this is condemning a huge number of Burmese of all ethnic groups to a life of poverty and restriction. Even if they can read and write, they have these invisible barriers around them. Here in the US, the problem is sometimes financial, that the higher education has become so prohibitively expensive. So these are perhaps could be compared in some ways, but the situation of the children who are forced to work, I did want to get back to how that is being rationalized in Burma, since it is so socially accepted. There are probably many developing countries where, yes, the poor relation from the country comes in and works. I remember 30 years back in Turkey, meeting a shoeshine boy who was really tiny, and he was like a little gentleman, and he, because I was a stranger, took me to a restaurant and paid for my meal.
Oh, wow.
I mean, he must have been 5, and he conducted himself with such dignity, and I was embarrassed, but I had to accept his offering, and so it was just a reminder. Now that may be less common in Istanbul now, but it probably still exists somewhere in Turkey. And so child labor is a global phenomenon. Children seem to be, in some ways, empowered by suddenly becoming adults, but are they?
Really excellent questions, and I think there are many things to say. So one issue that was sort of hovering in the background of what you're saying is whether or not it's good for children to work. So I'll start with the point of view of child laborers themselves, and then talk about small shop owners, and maybe move up from there. So if you ask a child, do you want to go to work, or do you want to go to school? This is someone who is a child who is working. I don't know if I ever heard a child say, I would rather go to school than work. They always say, I'd rather work than go to school. And so you have to think about that. Why would they say that? They would say that because if they don't work, they won't eat, and neither will their families. So of course, this choice makes sense. If the choice is to go to work or starve, you're going to choose to go to work and not starve. But I think what really struck me is that in talking to children and parents, and even others in the community, is that no one even thought that things could be any other way for the poor of the country. And that's what needs to change. So of course, if I was given the option, do you want to go to work or do you want to starve? I'm going to go to work. Well, I'm an adult, I go to work anyway. But of course, that's right. But there's still a problem. And the problem is the decision space is too small. The opportunities, this is not a free decision, it's a coerced decision. because, it's like if I go to the voting booth and they say, you will vote for X or else I will, shoot you in the head or something, I'm going to vote for X. But that's a coerced decision. And so this decision is of course, what they're saying when child laborers say, I want to work, what they're saying is, I want to eat, I want to support my family, I want to be a part of what people do in this community. And those are all good things. But what we need is for more decisions to be on the table. And so when you ask a shop owner, why do you employ, 8-year-olds or something like that? And they'll say, well, if I don't, they won't eat. And so we have the same thing at a higher level. And that might be true, but again, what needs to change are opportunities. And so again, one solution is if parents have higher paying jobs, if both mom and dad are able to take on some work or take in some work, sometimes the work can even happen in the home, that makes it less likely that children, especially small children, will have to stop going to school and go to work. And of course, longer term solution will have to involve education. So really to escape from the cycle of poverty, it requires education in Myanmar and other places, of course, too. Yeah.
I mean, we hear relativistic arguments that, we can't put Western standards on all countries. And while there may be some merit in that, that also is used to excuse a whole range of terrible abuses, frankly. And so we have to have some values here and look to see what the potential, the human potential of the people of Burma are. Of course, we see Rohingya are also excluded, and we're talking about Burmese as a whole right now. But many of the ethnic groups, and especially the Rohingya, are excluded even more than this. And so there's an othering going on, and perhaps to understand the psychology, the group psychology of oppression, of internalized oppression, of the logic of not seeing certain choices or recognizing them. This is sort of a different definition of disempowerment, when you don't even see any new solutions at all. You just see business as usual. So how does your background in philosophy inform your work here?
Mm-hmm. Good. So in philosophy, as philosophers, we're trained to, in the first instance, look at problems from a meta level, from outside. And so it is a bit unusual. I'm not the only one, but it's a bit unusual for philosophers to sort of, get down and dirty in actual real life details. But I've always, in my work, at least hoped to have some small impact on the actual world. So I never wanted to be the sort of academic who keeps her work in the ivory tower, so to speak. It's just, I'm just not able to do that. But what I do bring from my training and what philosophers in general can bring to real world problems is conceptual analysis. So I think that in order to solve any problem, whether that's the problem of child labor or the problem of racial injustice and so on and so forth, you first have to understand why. What's driving the problem? What's underneath it? What's behind it? Who are the actors, either personal or structural? And then you can start to think about solutions. And so that's really where the philosophy comes in, trying to understand, why is this a problem in this country in particular? How is it different than the way this problem presents in other countries? So in the first instance, philosophy is understanding what the problem is. And then I can make a few suggestions for change, but really that's when everyone else comes in, NGOs and activists and organizations like yours and so on and so forth. So once you really understand, okay, these are the components of the problem, then we can start to say, this component lends itself to this solution and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you find people in Burma are, have you found some partners for this? Are there people who share these concerns?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. From local NGOs and small schools that are government schools, but are trying to change the curriculum just on their own, all the way up to the International Labor Organization, which is, of course, a part of the United Nations. So there are actors there on, working on this problem. And during the most recent trip I made, which was this past December, I was able to meet with at least 3 or 4 organizations, all of whom are interested in helping us make this documentary when we come back with the film crew. And that's really important for many reasons. One is that we want to make sure that the local people that appear in the film, the local NGOs, that help us make the film, and so on and so forth, really want us to do this, really want us to be there. And and I wasn't so sure about that. Just because I have the idea to make a documentary doesn't mean that's a good idea. And so I really wanted to make sure that this is what local people and local organizations were wanting. And so much of the trip this last time was having those sorts of conversations with people. This is your story, and if you want us to tell it, please, help us tell it in a way that's going to be helpful to you, to your local community, to the there's over 180 racial groups in Myanmar. Well, people break it down in different ways. Some people say 64, some people say 185. There are many, right? So there's not just one story here. And so it's very important for us to try to capture the different angles, not to make just an interesting film, but to make a film that will cause people to want to act for change.
Well, that said, it would be great to show the video one more time, just to give some faces to this whole issue. The people of Myanmar and the people of Burma, that is, it's their future. And we're talking about their future when we talk about their children. So let's have the video again. And yeah. And actually, to find out more about Thanaka or to show support, is there a website or a Facebook page?
Yes, you can go to Thanaka Film. So that's THANAKA film.com. The website it's new. So it won't be up actually it will be up probably tomorrow. So you're gonna have to wait until tomorrow. In the meantime, you can also go to my personal website, Ashley Graham Kennedy, at weebly.com, and I have another short video that shows a bit about my work, and I will have, starting tomorrow, once the site is live, a link to the website, a link to an Instagram page, a link to a Twitter page, so that people that are interested in following the development of the film, or maybe interested to donating to efforts to send a crew back, so on and so forth, we will have a way for you to access all of that. Starting tomorrow. Sorry, I wasn't ready for today.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Ashley. We're near the end of our show. It's a little bit over time, actually. But thank you so much for your work and for what you have, what you're doing. We hope to see the film once it's completed, and hopefully maybe we can broadcast it once it's done.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all. All right. Take care, everybody.
Brother Adem, did you want to give a quick update? We have about 20 seconds.
20 seconds just to say that the International Court of Justice demanded that Burma prevent genocide, and Burma next week is going to respond. Our monthly report on Burma's compliance has just been posted on the Justice for All website. And please go there to see our last 3 months reports. Unfortunately, Burma is not in compliance. That's a short version.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. We'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye. Assalamu alaikum.